Are you in Australia, Dale, or were you?
No, I'm
I
in House
thought
Kitchen.
so also.
That's
Didn't
34th
you think he
Street.
was, okay, thank you.
You know,
just-
Leslie, I
just
thought
tagged-
also, and I sent him a
just
note.
I just tagged my publisher in Australia.
Oh, I was like, good for you, Dale.
Try to keep
right.
up with social media.
Dale, thank you. I'm calling the meeting to order this evening. Welcome to the Executive Committee meeting of Manhattan Community Board 4. My name is Jeffrey LaFrancois. I'm the chair of the board, and we are holding this meeting virtually by order of the governor, who has allowed us to do so during the pandemic. It'll be a topic of discussion later on in our meeting as well. This meeting is being recorded. It will be made available afterwards as well and can be accessed on our YouTube channel. If anybody is calling in this evening, they need to use *6 and *9 to be have their hand raised and be unmuted accordingly. And I think otherwise everybody else in the squares knows the deal. Unmute, please, and then we'll use the raise hand function throughout to take folks as questions come along. So Jesse sent around an updated agenda this morning. I do have one more item to add to the new business. It's a discussion point about state development sites. I just want to share some stuff about some state development sites that are in the district. So that'll be at the very end of our agenda. Any other questions on the agenda? Okay.
Actually, Jeffrey,
So the
I just
first-
have one. I'm sorry. I apologize. I have
No,
one.
please, Leslie.
It's new business. It's just something to put on the radar for trans, but I could do it with new business. It's just a one little thing. But I didn't know if I should do it now if Dale's going to move out, or we should wait till the end.
Christine is coming, so I'm sure
Okay.
she'll be here at some point. So
Okay,
we'll hold
thanks.
that for the end.
Okay.
Thanks,
I'll
Leslie.
text her.
So the first item before us tonight, many of you have heard about this MTA site. It's occupied the time of a number of folks on the board, committees, Hell's Kitchen Land Use, as well as Housing, Health, and Human Services took it up this month. The ULURP for this site, which is at 54th Street and 9th Avenue, was certified into last year, and we owe the City Planning Commission an opinion by March 15th. So accordingly, I'm going to pass it over to our esteemed chair, Mr. Noland, and Joe, to sort of give us some high points on this letter here, and we can get ready to bring it to full board.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you.
Okay, if I freeze up, I'll ask Joe or Paul to take over because I think they know what's going on. As you all know, the MTA site has dealt with this for a decade. I'm sure you know most of the details. We had a land use meeting on January 12th, where the ULURP was brought before us. On February, 9th, at the next land use committee, we responded to the ULURP. And that's what the letter is about. Our response to the ULURP. It was a unanimous decision by the land use committee to deny stuff unless certain things were met about the zone. Can everybody hear me? I seem to be frozen. Have I lost everybody?
We can hear you, JD. Maybe we're frozen on his end.
Okay, then subsequently, Housing Works, which is one of the partners in the development, went to the Housing Committee, and I'll let Joe talk about that. And that's also incorporated in this letter, which will be presented to the full board coming up next week. I think if there are any questions, just ask, but I think it's pretty clear in the letter what our response is.
Joe, anything to add from the Housing Committee side?
Yeah,
And then
just
I'll go to
wanted to note.
Christine.
Yeah, just wanted to note that if you note, the land use side is much more fleshed out. Housing only met on Thursday night, and we got a presentation from Housing Works. There were some questions about their presentation, so we're going to get follow-up clarification this week to get things like numbers and information in there properly. And Jesse and I will work on that.
Christine?
clarification. On line 330, you're talking about the backyards, right? The lot coverage enlargement. And you are saying it's to permit a greater lot coverage and lesser yards, except for portion of publicly owned zoning. Can you explain that piece which is in underline? Because I was confused about.
Gotcha. So this is the board's attempt to respond regarding the city's, it's an alternate action compared to the city's action, right? Where specifically the MTA site is owned by the city of New York, both the control center and the lot on 9th Avenue. And how this works across the city owns the property and the buildings, and they have a master lease with the MTA for all the facilities. They lease them back.
Well, that's what I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about the backyard, the lot coverage.
Right. So one of the things here is that the project that's currently proposed does not meet the lot coverage requirements. It exceeds them because the current MTA control center is there as part of the same zoning lot. A zoning lot is a legal device that draws a line around a whole area. As the city's, the city planning's response to this is to change the lot coverage requirements in the preservation area in total and to put a new special permit in to allow that to happen anywhere in the preservation area. Instead, this is an attempt to say only on a zoning lot that has a transit or water supply support facility could you get around the rear yard requirement. It's similar to action we've taken before where we're trying to support an affordable housing project. And instead of doing a district-wide change, we do something that is very narrow that enables the project to move ahead, but not affect the entire district.
So I understand what you're saying. The way I was reading the text was the reverse, and maybe that's my French or my English, but it sounded like you wanted to allow everybody to go greater lot coverage.
The opposite.
Except for that, right.
The opposite, yes.
So you may want to read that sentence and see whether it's clear or it's not clear to other people. I mean, I'm fine with it otherwise.
Well, we have actually are asking City Council land use to look at this before we send it to make sure it's the right wording entirely.
Okay, all right. And I have a second question, if you don't mind.
Sure, go ahead, Christine.
The second question is, why not develop the office space for MTA on the top of the current MTA building?
We asked that question in the public meeting, and the answer was first that they are moving certain office facilities to this location in order to do certain transit control facilities, and it would be very expensive. Our answer was, why have you looked into it? And quite honestly, the response was not that clear at all.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Paul?
Thanks, Jeffrey. I just want to raise the issue that Joe, I had already sent you an email and you responded, but I thought the others in the room might want to hear it as well. One of the issues that came up at the land use meeting was about the storage of emergency vehicles. We call it parking, they call it storage. And we don't feel it's appropriate to have employee parking on the new site. So Joe's going to craft some language to insert to make sure that it's not employee parking in the new development. So, thanks for that.
Thanks, Paul. Bert?
Joe, you said that you're waiting, Housing Work is coming back with some new numbers or information.
Not so much coming back because our meeting happened on Thursday night. We now have questions to ask them subsequent to the meeting to sort of clarify. So for example, they showed us a proposed contract budget of 1.3 million a year, but the detail underneath it does not add up to 1.3 million, it's more. And we asked them for qualifications of the staff. They sent those today. They'll be attached as an appendix. More like just fleshing out what they sent, so it can be presented clearly.
So it's not going to change position at all?
No.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bert. Marty?
Thank you, Jeffrey. I am always amazed with the amount of work that goes into this multi-page document, and I always learn stuff from it. The index that indicates the AMI and the income that you get at various levels of AMI is always astounding to me. So this stuff, I spent a good part of the afternoon trying to understand everything that you've done, and I appreciate the work that went into it. Here's the point. I'm uncomfortable with the position that our board is taking about 25% below 80% AMI and 75% above 80% AMI. I know that it's a position the board has taken for a whole number of years, and it has a history. I think it's time to review that position. The small number, the district desperately needs housing for people that are on the streets. And I don't think we accomplish it by only permitting 25% of this facility to be below 80% AMI. It should be greater.
So I just want to note for a moment, Marty, can I ask you where you live?
I am extremely fortunate to be living in Penn South. You know the answer to the question you
Right.
asked.
So Penn South is a modern middle income development in Chelsea. Hell's Kitchen has no moderate and middle income developments whatsoever. We were not able to take advantage of that process in the 1960s. One of the things that we're looking to strive here is balance. In the letter, we note that 701 units of low-income housing, predominantly below 60% of AMI, have been built or preserved from the Western Rail Yard's points of agreement. There are 2 sites slated for moderate and middle. So what I'm going to ask you to do is not about the board's policy, but to look at the broad picture in which the board took a position on the Western Rail Yards. We asked for low, moderate, and middle income housing. And we also asked for supportive housing, 150 units. 132 units of those have been constructed already. There have been, of those 701 units, 132 are supportive. I think it is important to use context and not just, we need to serve everybody. Of course we do. And that's why in 2009, our board said, serve the lowest income and supportive housing, serve low income, and serve moderate and middle. That's the goal here, have a full range. It is not one population against another, it's serving everybody. And that's why Penn South exists, and we're asking to have a small sliver of the 2,800 apartments you have in Penn South built in this district for permanent moderate and middle income housing. So we have a constant balance in the neighborhood. And I just want to leave it at that. That's all.
I quite understand that and in principle agree with it. But what's moderate and middle income housing has changed in the period of time that we've been having these discussions. Penn South has income bands that are significantly below the income bands that are described here. And the 165% AMI income bands are by and large above what I would call moderate. So I still think that in spite of the numbers that you recite in this document, and as I said, I spent the afternoon reading the document, I think we should warn the rest of the board that they ought to be prepared to spend some time in reading it. It's a significant document. The numbers have changed over that time.
I would note that what moderate middle income was in the 1960s, as opposed to today, is different. And the reason we have the broad range of bands is because 2 civil servants, each making $60,000 to $75,000, fall in these bands. And that's what's important to understand. Also note that in affordable housing developments, the rents are set below the upper income bands. It's a range. So the rents are always set 10 to 30, 20% below the income bands to have a range of affordability.
Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Joe. Katie?
Got it. Thank you. A couple questions about, so looking at lines 148 and 149, it says that this proposed development is now proposed to be all low-income supportive housing. Don't we mean low-income and supportive housing?
Yes, Katie.
Okay, so it's just an and we need there. Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure I understood that
Katie,
correctly.
give me the line again, because these are the kind of things I want to catch,
148 and 149.
Thank you.
And then in line 151 and 152, it says the goal of the WRYPOA was to ensure an economically diverse community to favor one income group.
Not to
over
favor,
another.
not to favor, yes.
I thought, okay. All
Yeah.
right. And
God bless you.
that's okay. It's why I'm one of the co-secretaries. If I can do one thing, it's actually proofread. But also, I guess to Marty's point, and maybe I didn't spend quite as much time, Marty, as you did. So good for you. Is there detail not about like Hell's Kitchen or Chelsea, but about our district as to how many low-income supportive housing, AMI, all those different, how it breaks out? Is that there?
Yes,
or is it just
yes.
by?
We have two documents that you can refer to. The first one is an affordable housing inventory that the board did many years ago, and we keep updating.
Okay.
But the other ones are all the points of agreement are monitored on a quarterly basis by Housing, Health, and Human Services. And there's a report done by the board as to here were the specific agreements, and here's what's been constructed or preserved to date.
Okay.
And that's for Hudson Yards, Western Rail Yards, and for West Chelsea. And what I found quite remarkable is the absolute majority of units that have been built so far, Katie, or preserved, are below 60% of AMI. When I say majority, like 60%, 70%, it's a remarkable thing. And the numbers are really there. It's fantastic to look at it. And Jesse can send it around to the whole committee. I think we did it last maybe in like late 2019, of course, pre-COVID, because
Or Katie joined the board, so she's never seen it.
Right.
Great.
But it was
Okay.
done 4 times a year.
So Jesse, if you could send that to me or something, or a link or whatever, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
I think to
Betty?
everyone, that would be good.
Did you just say my name?
I did.
Okay. Just a small thing on line 76. It says, modify the facade design to be more contextual with building facades along 9th Avenue and preservation area. I think it might be useful to give an example of what you're aiming at for there, like lower or brick, or I don't know, I think.
What if he just attached some street view photos from Google to give the context? Do it as an appendix.
That might be a possibility, but maybe somebody wouldn't see them. You're trying to get this point across, so maybe you want to think about a couple of details or examples or something.
We can do that. We did discuss details at the meeting, so we can add those details.
Yeah, we actually, in the discussions back and forth, we've said that, but we give some more. I'm trying not to be too constrained, but we'll give some details. I got it.
Okay, thanks. That's it.
Thanks, Betty. Christine?
So I have two more comments, one which is on format. I think this is an amazing letter and all the knowledge, and reading it, you really learn a lot. I think when you get down to your ULURP actions, with the numbers, it would be good maybe to bring to the front a quick summary of, this ULURP, we agree, we don't agree, and there is a replacement. You don't have to say what it is, but just say, we agree, we don't agree, and we have an alternate solution. So there is upfront like a capture, right?
We had a chart like that, and I can grab the language from that chart. That was part of our
And
back
put
and
it at the
forth during
front
discussion.
after the general, right?
Right, or maybe, it might be better in the hard part of was, Christine, some of them are really weird with the deny unless. So,
I know,
but
but
maybe we
that's-
get some detail. Okay.
Anyway, something at the front to say, okay, this is where we are.
Right.
And then the second thing on the issue, so 25%, if I understand, is quote unquote a concession by the board.
Yes.
to what the city is asking, right?
No, it's a concession from what the city committed.
Yes,
city
yes,
committed
yes.
to
That's what I
100%,
mean. That's what I'm saying. But then it's so. My concern is that, and I'm not talking about the value and the value proposition of whether we need more or not. I'm concerned that the number is going to be too low to be taken seriously. Like instead of 25 as a negotiation, we would be better to say, okay, we're going to agree to 40%. And
there was a lot of discussion about this among the working group the board set up internally, and it landed on 25 in order to start somewhere. And we really felt that the broader community, even 25 was quite a heavy lift. There was a meeting the board set up with all the block associations, and there was a lot of reluctance. They went along with that at this juncture so far. And Jesse, maybe you can speak to that because that was you were part of that discussion.
I was going to add that, Christine, I was in your camp initially wanting to start higher, frankly, show a greater concession, but the tone of the conversation with the city has changed, I think, markedly. And so based on the other conversations we had, we thought it was the place to start and stick from.
okay.
I would just add also that I think HPD's initial response when we presented this after we had spoken with the community and internally was actually quite positive.
Oh, okay.
I don't mean to say that they agreed to it.
No.
I'm just saying that they didn't roll their eyes and seem to think we were, they were quite, they were glad to see us, that we were making this move. And so I think it was seen as a positive move.
So I see Marty's hand up again. Dale, you're a new hand. Dale, I'm going to go to you and then Marty, and then I want to bring this item to a close. Dale?
Yeah, quickly, I'm just on that concession language. So is the fact that the supportive housing supportive what makes it outside of the scope of the Western Yards Agreement? Because according to your summary of the Western Yards Agreement, it's income bands 165 and under. So lower income bands are under 165.
Correct. Another provision of the Western Yards Agreement had 150 units of supportive housing as a separate item that was targeted specifically for the homeless and social service needy population. This one here it gave it a broad range, but it's really what's driving it, Dale, from what I understand, is the financing that specifically this developer has sought low-income housing tax credits, and that's what pushes all the affordability lower in the building to below 60% of AMI. They do that for scoring purposes. If they have a greater number of low-income units, they get a higher score, and therefore better chance to get the competitive credits and easier to finance the project. In the Western Rail Yards Agreement, that language was discussed subsequently by the board. And in the RFP, the board had a specific presentation attached that proposed a set of parameters, 80, 100, 125, 80, 100, 125, and 165. And that was discussed in public at length to try to clarify what that would mean. And in fact, HPD directed CB4 to recommend a specific funding program called M Squared to achieve that goal. And that's what's kind of curious here. In never of any of the discussions, about 3 years of those discussions, was there ever anything about supportive housing at all? So that came out of the blue. And that unfortunately has driven down the AMI bands at the same time. So I think if I round it out, this is really about an affordable housing project, and the community board agreeing now to say there could be a supportive housing component to that affordable housing project as a way to get to compromise, as opposed to saying it's a supportive housing project and we're back and forth saying yes or no.
I mean, I generally support the idea that we're countering with a alternative proposal that starts with 25%, but this is why I was always wary of the betrayal narrative that was kind of pounded on this, because according to the Western Yards Agreement, it's compliant as is.
If you look at the Western Yards Agreement alone,
it may not be compliant with the spirit of the negotiations, but it's compliant with the language of the Western Yards agreement as you've bullet pointed it.
The Western Yards agreement, though, is also informed by the RFP in the negotiation the board had about the RFP, in which there were
Right.
public statements by HBD that this was a moderate middle income project. So that's why.
I'm just
we
glad
put
we're
it
in a,
together.
Okay, thank you,
I'm just-
Dale.
I'm just glad we're in a rational place where we're proposing a reasonable counter instead of inflaming the situation as has been done previously.
We're trying.
Thank you, Dale. Like I said, the tone has changed markedly. So, Marty.
Since January 1.
On a totally different realm of conversation, I was struck when reading this letter. It periodically, such as on line 118 and 119, says community support or the community does not support. It's the community board. We don't quite represent the community, and it seems to me that you might want to go through the letter and take some more care with saying who is and who isn't supporting.
I would say that our role is to represent the community. And in this case, we've had literally hundreds of people come out and speak about this very specifically. And if anything, the board is tempering that community point of view, like Dale said. So I think it's important to say this is not just the board, but it's community support in general. Very rare we've had so many people come out on this.
Marty.
Sorry?
Jeffrey, is the right time to motion to adopt or no?
I would entertain a motion to
Then
adopt.
Then I would make a motion to adopt.
Is there a second? Thank you, Bert. Okay, any objections?
Can I just ask a procedural question? Sorry.
You may, Katie, on the motion.
So this is, I'm just trying to understand the process. So this is us as the executive committee adopting the letter just to send it to the full board. Is that right?
So two committees took this up, and so we're sort of putting them in the shaker at executive committee and serving it to the full board accordingly is how this vote is being taken. Does that make sense?
Okay, but just to make, so before any letter goes to full board, it goes through executive committee and it gets voted
No.
on?
Nope, any committee, but we thought it was appropriate in the spirit of transparency, given the two committees work on the letter and that they were being put into one letter to the Department of City Planning and our electeds, that, you know, we'd wend it through this process to have it land at full board accordingly.
Okay, so when we have two committees or something working on something, then we do it this way.
This was where we, for this, yes.
Okay, got it. Okay, thanks.
So I have one objection. Any abstentions? Present not eligible? Okay, all in favor. That's the rest. The letter passes. Thank you,
But
everybody.
Dale, what did you, I don't know what Dale did. I didn't see his hand up.
Dale had his hand up.
Get his hand up.
Yep.
He had his hand up, I think, Christine, from before when he was talking, but then approved.
Okay,
That's what I meant, his physical hand, yeah.
yeah, I did.
Thank you very much, JD, for that, and Joe for that, and to the committees. This will not be the last time you hear about this topic.
No.
Sure. Okay, going into the chair's report this evening. Starting off, I am pleased to share there's going to be some changes to co-chair leadership on two committees on the board. We'll start in Chelsea, which has long been co-helmed by Betty McIntosh, one of the esteemed and long-serving co-chairs of our board in general, actually. And of course, Paul Devlin, who took those reins 2 years ago, serving as co-chair. Beginning in March, both of them are going to be stepping down to be just regular members of the committee, and Jessica Chait and Carrie Keenan will be stepping in as co-chairs of Chelsea Land Use. This decision came about through conversations that I had with Betty and with Paul and with others, which leads to the next announcement. And Paul will be going from co-chair of CLU to a regular member of CLU to then becoming co-chair at Clinton Hell's Kitchen Land Use and joining JD as co-chair of that committee. These are both significant changes that I did not take lightly, nor did anybody that I spoke to about these decisions take them lightly. And, you know, 2 new co-chairs in one committee and a change to how one has been run for a long time. So I recognize there'll be hiccups and mistakes along the way, which is what happens, and that's why we're here. And JD, I thank you for saying there will be none of that. But I want to pause and pass the microphone to Ms. McIntosh, so she can have a moment to explain to the committee how some of this came about. Betty?
Thank you, Jeffrey. I just would like to explain my change. I'm shifting from the co-chair of Chelsea Land Use to being a committee member because I need to spend more time with my husband, Rich, who has cognitive dysfunction, difficulties with memory, organization, and other issues. I have been helping him to organize his office so that he can continue his private psychotherapy practice. Tomorrow, we go to the Mount Sinai Center for Cognitive Health, which will evaluate his condition in depth and probably call for an MRI. I will continue with the Port Authority Bus Terminal Working Group and continue as a member of HHHS Committee. I plan to participate in full board meetings. And of course, I plan to read draft letters so that I can keep giving editing suggestions. I would like to say that Paul has been a wonderful co-chair. He has very good sense, a very hard worker, and imaginative problem solving. I love working with you all, and you are an amazing bunch of dedicated people. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty, very much for sharing that and for all your time and dedication to the board and to the community. Absolutely. I know Carrie is here. She's a newer member of CB4. The one other technical note to note is on Jessica's committee assignments. She was previously a member of Chelsea Land Use, and so she'll be joining that committee, rejoining that committee, and also staying on Housing, Health, and Human Services. And broadly speaking, this decision came about because I saw it as a matter of equity across the board, and then also because term limits are coming. And I think it's really important for us to do our best to make sure that institutional knowledge is passed on, that we have plans for leadership, and really just bringing folks up the not chain of command, but just chain of involvement in ways that are not necessarily always straightforward, take a little hard work, and we get there. Paul, Jessica, Carrie, anything to add briefly, JD?
Yes, Paul has agreed to write all the letters for the next 2 years. I'm very pleased to hear that. So welcome, Paul.
Well, that's funny because Paul also agreed to do all the work still at Chelsea Land Use. So I don't know how this is going to work out, but we know Paul. No, just kidding. I know Carrie and I are both really excited and have a lot to learn in terms of this opportunity, and grateful for Betty and Paul and all the work that so many others on this in this group have done, and look forward to harnessing all of that knowledge that you all have to continue the strong leadership of CLU.
And Paul, there's only 15 ULERPs coming this year, so we're fine.
Yeah. I also want to add that I'm grateful for the time working with one of the longest serving co-chairs, Betty, and moving over to serving with one of the longest serving chairs, JD. So I feel my job is easy. So thank you for that.
Carrie, anything to add?
If we're talking gratitude, I'm very grateful that Betty and Paul are still going to be on the committee. Thank you.
Great. Well, we're thrilled to have you and looking forward. So thank you all for that. I'll be announcing this at full board in a week and a half, and this will take effect starting with our March committee meetings. So thanks to everybody, the shifting on this puzzle. Moving on to the next item, Social and Racial Justice Task Force. Katie is co-chair of that committee, and Viren has also been a co-chair of that. Viren informed us last month that he's going to have to step back as co-chair of that committee. So Jesse and I met with Katie, sort of are chatting through strategy on what potential this committee can continue to offer the board and the community, and working through some scenarios of what that might look like. It could stay on. There's potential for a new co-chair to be identified.
Actually, he's agreed.
There we go. So it is that we have a new co-chair, but there's also decision to be what will the function of the actual committee be, in terms of it might not be useful to have it continue to be a monthly a task force that meets monthly. And so thinking about shifting it into some sort of working group, and it takes up bigger issues and becomes a platform for hosting events or having topics of discussion in the community on these issues. So stay tuned for more on that. Katie and I and Jesse have more chatting to do, but wanted you all to be aware of that accordingly.
Can I tell you who the new co-chair is, or that he's agreed?
Sure. I mean, I guess so. I would have liked to have had that conversation before this evening, but go ahead, Katie.
It's the very person we agreed that I would ask first, so it's all good. Sorry. Should have forwarded you his acceptance, but it's Leslie Williams, which is great.
Yes, thank you for that. I think many of us know, and if they don't, then we certainly will. So looking forward to that, and looking forward to working with him as well. Next item, we all know the Hudson River Park Trust, and when an item of significance takes place at the trust, they're required by the Act to hold a significant action process. The Chelsea Piers lease is up for renewal. The previous lease was issued by the Department of Transportation before Hudson River Park Trust existed, and WPE took up that significant action presentation by the trust earlier this month. It was a lengthy committee meeting, and while there is a lot of good that the trust is getting out of this, and certainly the community, and Chelsea Piers is very much a valued establishment in the community, there's a lot that we're not getting. Looking back on that, we've long asked for. Many in the community feel burned by the original Chelsea Piers agreement and lease signing. And so a number of things that we were hoping we would get out of this, which include the removal of a vehicular lane in front of the pier, that we thought would happen, and we're told it is not because of cost. And yet the very reason this lease is, we were told, is being extended at this time is to further be able to leverage the assets of the pier to help Chelsea Piers continue to exist. We're calling for significant use in green energy and the installation of electronic vehicle charging facilities inside the garage. We're asking for to see the original lease, and recognizing that while it may be costly and challenging to relocate one of the vehicular lanes, most of the uses of those lanes, which right now are video production parking, craft services for video shoots and events, a lot of that can be done inside their 350 space parking facility inside the pier. So accordingly, we're going to hold a public hearing at our full board meeting on this item next week as well. The trust also has a hearing on March 16th. 22nd. Thank you, Jessica. On this topic, at which we'll testify. So just keeping everybody in the loop on this. You will see the letter coming out from the committee next week. Jessica?
Sorry, couldn't get my mute button. Just a question to make sure that, to the extent there was the negotiation about the Intrepid, I'm just curious. I mean, I know Lowell was, very, very active and vocal on that, as were many others, of course. Just curious, like, what we think we can learn from that experience and apply it to this, or if in fact they feel very different. I don't know, maybe they do, but
I mean, I think
they have a lot of things that run.
Yeah. My thinking on that was that it's actually apples to oranges, because the Intrepid is a nonprofit cultural institution, right? And so the city already has a policy, the city, not across the board, of not charging institutions like that rent, or providing significant funding in various ways. So in my conversations with Leslie and Marty on this, and takeaway from the committee, and Leslie, Marty, please step in, is that it apples to oranges in terms of who they are. Chelsea Piers is a for-profit private entity negotiating its lease here.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess I was thinking more about, I know there were questions about the valuation of things like how much it costs to maintain the pier and other things that may have given us insight as to like what the real costs are associated with operations. Just data points like that could inform how hard we want to push.
I mean, I think that there were very real numbers shared. Chelsea Piers is the biggest paying tenant to Hudson River Park. They are responsible for pier maintenance and bulkhead maintenance, which the costs are a lot. I can't think of the exact number off the top of my head, but what I take away from that is they're still paying $8 million plus a year in rent to the trust and maintaining all those piers and piles. That the excuse at the end of the day, when this is a 44-year lease, they can't remove a vehicular lane because of cost, I find a little, perplexing. So, and we asked for the engineer report to find out if the direction was to remove a lane, or was the direction just to do sort of a study of the use of the space, right? I feel like there's two different directions there when you talk to an engineer of what you're looking for.
Jeffrey, I think you're right. There were numbers shared. I'm not sure how they were. Very general. There are some very real general numbers. Is it 4 million a year, 4.4 million a year that the rent is, and not 8 million?
That's their base rent, yes.
And that goes up to 8, does it?
I think so.
But that's it. It was just the general numbers. You and I had an exchange about what it costs to do pier maintenance, pile maintenance, and we're not really sure what that is. The number 100 million was thrown around, and what period of time that 100 million covers, we're not sure.
Well, we know that number has context because Pier 40, it took $100 million to replace and repair the piles under Pier 40. So we're looking for clarification from the trust. Is $100 million over the duration of the lease for the maintenance of those? So that's going to be a key. That'll be a real number.
And Jessica, I think your point is extremely valid. We talked about the exact same thing when we were with the Intrepid about, even though they have this $1 rent, what are they actually doing, right? Financially to upkeep the pier. So I think with this, there were two big things. One was, as Jeffrey said, the length of the lease. Once it's, it's done, we're talking, what was it, 45 years, 50, it's a very long time. And the second was, we really weren't squabbling about money. It was more, we feel that there is a bicycle lane or a pedestrian lane that is rightfully the public's, that they're taking up through this private, they keep saying the law and order, car lane. So I think those were two. I don't know if that gives you a little bit of, overview, but.
No, thank you.
I'd like to add to that, Leslie. To the extent we were squabbling about money was when we asked for the removal of the lane, it was dismissed out of hand as being too expensive.
Right. And we didn't see the study that said it was too expensive either. Just so you know, there's no vote on this by exec this evening. This vote will come at full board. I'm just bringing everybody along for the hearing. Bert.
Yeah, I just want to get a clearer understanding. The 44-year lease is the new lease to be signed?
Yeah, it's a 34-year lease with a 10-year renewal.
Renewal, and so the current lease is expiring sometime this year, I assume. That's what we're talking.
No.
Yeah,
No, the current lease has 21 more years to go.
21?
Wait, the current lease.
The current lease.
Okay, wait, Marty, I'm sorry. I just want to get this in my head.
Yeah.
Understand. The current lease
is not expiring.
So the current lease is not expiring. It has 21 more years to go. And then the 44-year lease is on top of that?
No, it starts as the lease is signed. Starts.
Right. So this comes about the same reason back in the 90s that Chelsea Piers got into a lot of hot water, because it wanted to extend its lease for 90 years or something to leverage that for capital and loan reasons.
Okay,
So
I'm just trying to understand why now is this discussion happening?
because the trust is engaged in a new lease negotiation, and so they have to take this through their significant action process as is outlined in the Hudson River Park Act.
I don't understand.
I don't understand what is this point in time
Jeffrey,
in terms of their lease?
Mr. Kern.
Bert, Chelsea Piers came to the trust and asked for the lease extension because they want to refinance.
Okay.
So
Okay,
that's
I got
where
it.
the lease
They're in the
extension-
middle. They're in the middle of the lease, but they want
They're in the
some
middle of the
money.
lease. They asked for an
I
extension
got it.
because then
I
they can
understand.
refinance.
Now I understand. Thank you,
Thank you,
Lowell.
Lowell.
And so what we're saying, all the issues that what we're bringing up, the lane and all of those issues are not monetary issues. So we don't really have a position on lengthening the lease, what money is coming in. We have no position on that. We're just talking about the bicycle path, the lane, the law and order lane, that kind of stuff. Nothing about the terms of the lease or the money involved. Am I correct in saying that?
That's correct.
Shouldn't that, my next, I don't have right now, could say that we should ask for this or that, but shouldn't we also talk about the money?
I mean,
I'm throwing that out.
Leslie, Marty, that wasn't, I mean, the money is significant. And so I'm not sure if that was a part of the discussion, because these were things we thought we could get from a lease negotiation. That would also cost money.
I mean, the money was definitely part of the discussion, and the Hudson River Park Trust brought on their finance people to discuss why and, you know, when and why the numbers were the numbers. Is that what you're asking, Bert? Like we should be positioning ourselves to ask for more money? Like you would
I
feel
don't know, because
comfortable-
this is the park, one of the financial
Engines.
pillars of the park. What was that, Lowell?
Engines.
Engines of the park. There are 4 sites or 5 sites that should generate money to fund the park. This is one of the major ones. And so now they're coming to us and they want to extend the lease. So this should be an opportunity. Well, how much money are we getting from them? Is that sufficient? Do we want more money from them? That should be part of I think that should be part of the discussion. I don't have any of the numbers. You guys have the numbers. Maybe they don't have the numbers to give us or share with us. But I think that might be part of the discussion.
So
when it was presented to us, the others who were there will correct me if I'm wrong, was we are talking about a renewal or a switch of the lease. We're talking about a renewal of the lease. It is going to have a moderate increase. They gave the number that I remembered was the 4 point something million. And Jeffrey is correct that there are additions to that 4.4 million. And that was the end of the discussion. We did not challenge that number. I don't think we were in a position to challenge that number.
I could, just to share on some things, in addition to the base rent, which is a $300,000 increase off their current rent, it increases every 2 years on the CPI. There's also significant increases at 2032, 2034, and at the renewal. They also pay percentages based on upper income revenue of upper threshold income, and then additional subtenanting percentage income, and then a percentage of new transaction rent that Chelsea Piers does. So the base is very much a base, and there's a significant number of percentages that are built in along the way.
All of that is interesting, but at no point did we challenge those numbers, nor could we.
I'm not saying we need to challenge. I just want to understand what's the lease, how much money does it throw off to the park? And now you're saying it built in are increases. There are increases built into the lease. Inflation increases by the CPI and other kinds of increases based on who they're renting to, how much money they're getting. Okay, that gives me something there, that it's not flat.
Thanks, Bert. Betty?
This is a process question. So at the next board meeting, there will be a presentation about this from Hudson River Trust. Is that correct? Is that what you said? Who said that?
Jeffrey, you said we're having a public hearing.
Right, we're having a hearing on it.
And will there be a
So
presentation?
we'll hear from the public on the topic.
No, but they
No,
don't
Betty,
have-
to answer your question, the letter is what you're having the hearing on.
Thank you. It's our, right.
oh, so-
Similar
There
to the hearing we're gonna have on the MTA site. We're having a hearing on the letter, so people can be reviewing the letter and commenting on what the letter says. We're not having we're not having the trust or HPD come and present on these two items, but it's the
Oh.
hearing about the letter.
Oh, so at the next board package, there'll be a letter from the Waterfront Committee.
Yes.
Yeah.
And,
Yes.
and I guess I'd like to encourage that the letter or has an appendix or something with some more fact, or the letter includes these answers to these questions about the money and the lease and the negotiations and blah, 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 all that. So, because it is, hard to understand it otherwise. And then on another level, my daughter works at Chelsea Piers, so I do present but not eligible.
I don't think
No,
that.
no.
I don't think it's,
Fine.
yeah, it's not a direct financial.
Okay,
Right.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Alan and then Christine.
On Betty's
Thank you,
point,
Jeffrey.
may I
So-
make a comment?
Hold on, Alan. Marty.
May I
Go
make
ahead.
a comment about Betty's point? A lot of the general questions were addressed in the slide presentation they gave, and maybe that could be appended to the letter.
We can certainly send it around as well. We'll send it around to the full board for them to review. So they'll have that information.
Alan and then Christine.
So as far as the lane goes, I don't recall the conversation being so much about the finances. I don't really recall, I think his name is David, that this was a financial situation, but rather the feasibility of removing this lane and the impact on the business that they're doing, basically to supply and to accommodate the buses, the trucks and everything else, because as you said, you get sometimes 6, 7 buses dropping off students during the day to do things. Maybe they're going out on the boats or whatever. These buses cannot go into the parking area. Same thing with the trucks. The same thing with the commissary.
Alan, I want to apologize because we're in the weeds. I wanted to let exec know why we'd be having a hearing on this at full board, and I don't want to relitigate the letter, which unfortunately has not even been circulated to you guys yet because that doesn't come out until next week.
I'm not looking to relitigate the letter. I'm just trying to maybe shed some light on it, because if you go back and you look at the site, removing a lane does cause a hardship in terms of traffic flow, which could have sometimes detrimental effect if you have emergency services going in and everything else. I think what they've done with the design alleviates some of the remarks might have been people unable to walk on the sidewalk. I think they want to extend, I think there was maybe a comment made about extending the sidewalk to relieve the traffic on that.
Right.
What they've done, if you look at the design and you look at the space itself, the site itself, which may be, in the future, perhaps we can do a site visit when we have these type of issues. You could see that they've done a marvelous job keeping the flow in the front of the pier rather than walking behind an ugly building and getting involved with the business aspect of it. Thank you.
Jeffrey, if you want me, I can reconcile what Alan was saying with the financial point, if you want me to.
Sure.
What it comes down to is that the television studios are the largest revenue generators for Chelsea Piers, enabling them to pay the rent. So they want to do everything they can to make their television studio tenants happy and the television studios want those lanes. It's not, that's where the finances come in, because Chelsea Piers needs that money to pay the rent to the trust. So that's why they're bending over backwards to make the TV studios happy.
Thank you, Lowell. And just the comment in the letter, we are asking for the supposed engineer's report that said it's not feasible, and whether or not, and what the direction to that engineer was. Christine and then Joe.
Yeah, a quick observation is that it would be good to know what was in the lease up to now, because if they have in the lease, they had those escalators now, what you have is them renegotiating, so they bypass the escalators and move them to the end. And every time they are going to come back before the end of the lease and bypass the escalators. So I think it would be good to know how much money is being left on the table because the escalators, if they are escalators, okay, that's just a thought. Second thought is that I think 44 years is insane. And I think we should really oppose that very strongly. I mean, you know, 30 years is already long, 25 years would be good. And that's it. And finally, from what you have said, I'm not clear whether the lane of traffic in front of the Chelsea are being leased to Chelsea or not. What is the lease? Where do they stop?
Christine, we do not know because it was a lease signed with DOT and we have not been provided the original lease.
But we could send a letter to DOT saying, you know, we don't want that lane to be leased. That's what we can do. If there is no reason, and if this is leased by Chelsea, we can go and ask them to refurbish the lanes, which is going to cost them an arm and a leg, right? Mm. So anyway, these are my thoughts about.
They said that exactly, Christy. We said refurbish the lanes, and they actually said it would cost us an arm and a leg.
So, yeah. You know, so if they can't refurbish the lane, then they shouldn't lease it. This is a very clear, I mean, how many times they are supposed to be refurbished every 7 years. So what is it?
Christine, it's not a question of refurbishing the lanes. There are 3 lanes that are part of the property that are in front of Chelsea Piers, and they are taking up, the TV studios routinely take up 2 of those 3 lanes. It's part of the property, it's not part of the actual lease to the TV studios, but the TV studios routinely take up 2 of those 3 lanes, making it hazardous for pedestrians because the sidewalk is very narrow there. It's not a question of refurbishing. What the trust asked them to do was, what was looked into is whether or not a 4th lane could be added or whether they could get their trucks out of those lanes.
Yes.
And that's where Chelsea Piers pushed back.
Right. But what my point is that, so if they don't pay for the lanes and they don't pay for the maintenance of the lanes, but they don't want us to reduce the number of lanes. This is something we want to be very explicit with DOT saying, look, we have asked for a lane on the highway to be removed. And that would be so much more effective to take one of those lanes to do another bike lane or a pedestrian lane. And so either they pay for it or they don't, you know, this is my point.
I think they don't pay for it. It is part of the Chelsea Piers. Those lanes are part of the Chelsea Piers property. So Chelsea Piers is paying for it. The studios aren't paying Chelsea Piers for those lanes, but Chelsea Piers is paying rent for those lanes.
They are?
Yes, because it's part of the property.
Okay. Well. All right.
Thank you. Joe?
First, the pile maintenance, the analogy to Pier 40 is not accurate. Pier 40 was not maintained whatsoever. The piles were worked on when Chelsea Piers got this lease many, many years ago. So it is not going to be $100 million. That was for piles that were never touched, ever. Second thing is, any financing normally is 30 years. That's the normal term. So I'm stating that the length of this lease is financing plus. So it's not just, very few banks are going to give more than 30 years. The business model is just old here. And I will say that Chelsea Piers, by saying we can't do X, Y, or Z, can't bring the trucks in now and can't do this, can't do that. That's because that's what they've had and that's how they've operated. And honestly, in my experience on the board, with Roland Betts coming to meeting after meeting. These are individuals who have made bluntly heavy donations to New York State elected officials. And as the board tried and many times to deal with issues, we were rebuffed. This is not a matter of can it operate. This is a matter of how much return Chelsea Piers is going to make over the term of their lease. That's all this is, and it's the increment. They should be pushed very heavily to make it operate better and create more of a public realm as opposed to it serving the private realm. It's a balance, and I think they can do it, and it's a pile of hot, you know what. Thank you.
Joe, that's not entirely true. Because of the physical structure, some of those trucks can't make the turns into the parking lot.
They could make it, they could
It's
change the
mostly-
structure, right?
What you say is mostly true. It's not 100% true.
Okay, I'll go for 90%.
Fair enough.
So this was, I think, not the conversation I expected to have, but as Jesse always tells me, it makes it better.
Welcome to Life is Share, Jeffrey. Welcome to Life is Share.
And by the way, guys, WPE has a dog poop letter also, if you want to talk about that. I don't know if it's gonna, you know.
So this was, I think, very useful. Stay tuned for the letter. This will come up again at full board, and appreciate everybody's comments and really sharp points of approach here. So next item, New York State Emergency Declaration and Opens Meeting Law is set to expire on March 15th. And accordingly, by the letter of the law, we therefore would be required to be back in person in meetings. So this came up at Borough Board earlier this month. Jesse and I have been talking about it. We are putting some plans into effect for a potential March 16 return. If the state legislature acts and amends the law to allow for participation of voting members in a hybrid model, we will figure out a way to pursue that. There's a couple scenarios that Jesse's working through with the team and also the company that we engaged with last year to do a hybrid model for our full board meetings. So stay tuned, but know that there may be a requirement for us to do business in person if we expect our votes to stand. What we're looking at is hybrid participation, potentially by the public, with the expectation of members need to be present if the law doesn't change by the time we have to be back in person. Jesse, did I miss anything sort of in a high level way there?
No, that was fine. Yeah, I mean, right now, what we're hearing is that there's probably a good chance that the extension will not be renewed on March 15th, you know, and that means we're going back to the in-person meetings. There's nothing right now that tells us that the open meetings law will be amended by that date. And so we'll be in the same situations that we were last year. What was it, in July, I believe. And so, you know, until the open meeting, if the emergency health declaration continues not to be renewed, then we are waiting until the open meetings law gets amended, and then we can, then that means members of the body, which is you guys, would be able to meet remotely and vote remotely. There's a number of different boards coming up with a number of different ways of doing this. But just giving everybody a heads up.
JD and then Blake.
Jesse, a question to you. Where would we meet? Do you have any idea what venues would be available?
Sure.
Where we could keep a distance, and would masks still be advised? What do you think?
So my thought, this is all kind of still being kind of sketched out. My thought would be to aim for our biggest venues to allow for the highest amount of appropriate social distancing. So, again, I have not confirmed any of these. I've begun conversations with some of them. And some of them I have to get back to, and they were never available during the COVID crisis at all, like Mount Sinai West, something along those lines. But I think Hotels Trades Council auditorium was available to us. Fulton, the Fulton Center on where we held that full board, in-person full board, was available to us. Javits made themselves available to us. So locations like that, I think, would be a good locations in terms of making sure social distancing occurs. And also what I like about those locations is that they have their own health protocols. So if you remember, Fulton had their own health protocols, Javits had their own health protocols when BLP met there. So I wouldn't be surprised if vaccinations required, things like that. Again, we haven't gotten to those details yet. Then if you're talking about once we can go hybrid, really what matters there is a consistency of space and equipment. And so I don't think we're there yet. I don't want to get us too off. We can go on all night on this, but my thought would be to find a consistent space to hold high meetings in which members could be there in person, but also have the equipment ready to go to allow other members to call in remotely, and also the public. And so that would mean that there would be one location. What I would recommend is to have one location for all committee meetings that would be a central location in our district that we can sort of have control over and allow that to happen. And then we would, with the goal of doing a fully hybrid full board, and using a service most likely for that, because that's just going to be too much of a lift for beyond, I think, me and my staff's abilities. If that
Blake,
answers your question, JD.
Blake, and then Katie.
Yeah, quick question. It's been so long since we met in person. I was wondering if there is some sort of recording device that is at an in-person meeting, since it's really hard to get the minutes right on the first.
Mr. Co-Secretary, I assume your title has something to do with this question.
Very important.
That's a great point. Jesse, I don't believe we used to record, did we?
So we did. So this is back in the day. If Mike Noble's on, he's in the attendee section there. But we would record. So I can record on a device, but you guys could obviously also record. We would, on a full board setup, we would have, similar to what we had that last time we did one, we had a service do it. So, we had microphones, we had, speakers, we had someone, streaming it live. So we could easily get you a recording. We'd figure that out.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. And of course, obviously, if we're doing it fully hybrid through our Zoom, you're going to get the same, we'll mic it and everything. So
Katie, and then Lowell.
Similar to Blake's question as co-secretary, I do recall that at the meeting that we had at Fulton Center, Jesse, it seemed like a really great large space, but the acoustics weren't great. It was really hard to understand people, especially people who were speaking into the mic, actually. So I guess I would just say that as we're thinking about, making these plans, if we can do it maybe not the way we did it in July, because that was hard, or if there's like a different kind of miking system or something. But
yeah, so that's why I think I would like to aim for a different setup for committee meetings, because I think it was a problem for committee meetings as well, just hearing everybody in that space. So I think we can certainly think about finding, exploring another option for a full board space. But I want to just be very honest. It's, it's not like we had a lot of spaces to choose from for full board either before COVID. So, we will do our best. But I think it will have to be able to work with what we've got.
Okay.
Lowell, and then Carrie.
Jesse, two quick things. The MTA conference room you and I looked at would probably work really well for committee meetings, not for full board though.
Oh, you mean the Amtrak? You're talking about the Amtrak?
Amtrak, yeah.
Yeah, no, so that's one of my locations to think about as a permanent, possibly a permanent, like,
Yeah,
right.
okay, so that was the first thing I wanted to remind you that. Second thing, one of the problems I know we had when we were battling this last July was funding. Is the borough president's office going to provide additional funding for us to go hybrid?
So I was the one to bring that up at Borough Board because of all of you guys, and that's key. There's no indication yet whether or not that's going to happen. I also haven't scrubbed the budget to see anything how community boards did in the budget. So the borough president's office is aware, but they haven't told us one way or another if they're going to support it.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Jeffrey. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, Jeffrey said it best. There's no information on that yet. No, the good news is we do have some extra funding. I do, unfortunately, I think there was a possibility of having extra funding for some sort of board or committee work to be done. But honestly, if we really do have to go into a hybrid fashion, I would like to reserve that funding to, figure out all those extra little problems. I will say the good news is that we purchased certain hardware right before this all happened, or in the middle of it happening, that we have two very good Owl Pro cameras that are cameras, mics, and speakers. We've got microphones, portable microphones and mic stands, so we've got some equipment that we can actually already use. So, but in terms of like overall funding, we're going to have to figure that out.
Carrie?
Thanks. I'm not sure I'm allowed to ask a question yet, but I just had a question about masks and mask mandates, because as they're being lifted, does that apply to us as well? Or can we, I know you said it's about the space, but just in terms of the community boards.
I mean, we are a city agency, so I'll be honest with you, I'm not completely up to date, but in the past, we were not able to tell anybody to wear a mask. So,
but currently all nonprofits and city agencies require masks.
I'm sorry, say again.
Like right now, city agencies and nonprofits that get funding from the city, I imagine community board fits somewhere between those two in that Venn diagram somehow, require employees and everyone on premises to wear masks.
Again, I don't doubt that. I think that would probably be pretty easy to accomplish for our members. I'm just talking about the public, and in terms of a public aspect. And so again, I think there's a lot of controls we can have about the space,
the space allowed us. I was the enforcer in our meetings in July. The Fulton Center did not allow you in without a mask. I was able to go up to people and have them leave because they would not wear a mask, because that was the requirement for that location.
Right, that's what I'm trying to say. The location can make that requirement and we can follow that requirement. I'm just saying, as an agency, as like my staff, if you, Joe, being Joe Restuccia, or, other members can certainly, do your best. But I'm saying in terms of, from my understanding, what we were told and what were explained to us then at that time, I can't require anybody to wear a mask. So.
Christine, with the last word on the topic, because I want to move on.
So my only question is are we pushing the borough president and the mayor to ask for continuing, the online? Because I think it's really practical. And as we have said in the past, there are more attendance, et cetera, et cetera. So this is good. So
we sent a letter to the governor, and we will resurface it for the mayor. I think there will be some semblance of in person, but the hybrid is what's key. And right now, the hybrid is not allowed by the law. So the key is getting a change in the law.
Got it.
I mean, listen, I think there's a very good chance come next month, Transportation Committee is going to technically be under by law to be in person. And
that was such a good success last time. In person, nobody could hear anything, and then the public got furious.
So, but then the discussion, of course, becomes whether or not we do abide by the law, and do we just take up everything at a meeting when we are all present and voting, and the actions of the committee are recommendations, not a vote. So like there's numerous approaches that we can take. We're not going to solve it tonight. We recognize that we've seen significant increase in attendance with online, and that's why we're going to push for the hybrid model. But just to flag that changes could be coming down the pike. Working groups and small meetings. Port Authority Bus Terminal Replacement Working Group continues to have its bi-weekly meetings with the port, and as well as its internal planning meetings accordingly. Penn Station area redevelopment project is, we received an update last week that public comments are being compiled and responded to as is required by law for ESD. They held 2 hearings. The second hearing was, I believe, 12 hours, I believe, on it, 600 plus pages of comments. And so once that happens, an updated plan will be presented to the public, at which time we've been told the Community Advisory Council will convene, and we will, take that up accordingly. I believe that's the extent of the information we've been made aware of. The Sanitation Planning Working Group, which was constituted last month, their work begins, I believe, this week, or it began already.
No, March 8th.
March 8th, sorry. Okay, their work begins March 8th, so stay tuned for updates on that. And then just a couple of other small meetings. Clinton Health Kitchen Land Use met with the owners of 343 West 47th Street and the Department of Buildings. That was regarding an illegal demolition. And then Chelsea Land Use provided testimony to the LPC regarding the revised facade plan at 14th Street and 9th Avenue to the Gansevoort Market Historic District buildings at that site. I have nothing else to report on until new business, so I'm going to pass it over to Jesse unless I see a question from Bert. Mr. Lazarin.
Yeah, I don't remember now what the sanitation task force, what they were supposed to do, but I just would recommend or suggest strongly that, from what I understand, composting was eliminated from the budget. And I think they should take a look at that.
The good thing is WPE already has a letter in the works on compost.
Great.
And yes.
That's with the dog poop, Bert. We're going to do the dog poop, the composting. We got it all for you.
Okay, you're way ahead of me. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bert. Jesse.
So the committee, the full board agenda is in your Dropbox.
Oh,
there.
I'm sorry. I saw your hand late. Was it your question?
Yeah, I just said I have been told unofficially regarding Penn Station that the 600 pages of comments will likely not be compiled till May or June. So we probably won't be reconvening until then.
Good to know. Thank you.
I'm sorry. So the full board agenda is in your Dropbox along with the tentative committee schedule for March. My apologies about getting it to you guys a little bit late. I usually try to get it to you last week, but there were just a couple things outstanding. So you should take a look at that. There will be 2 hearings. There will be a presentation at full board. And yeah, so that's that. All committees are this month. I actually am right that when I report that all committees are meeting on their regular dates and times for March. So that's good. And then what else do I have on there? I'm sorry, I'm not looking at my screen.
You have public hearings, proposed hearings, and then you go to your office space update.
Oh, great. Yeah. So the great news about office space is, so unfortunately, it does not look like we will be able to stay in the building that we are in for a long-term lease. And so we are out again looking for office space. Yes, thank you, Lowell. That is exactly, unfortunately, how I felt for about an hour or a couple of days there. So we have begun looking at another location. I'm somewhat excited about it. It's a little more north than we would normally be, but it's in the, right now we're tentatively looking at the old Film Center building, which is at 630 9th Avenue. It's a beautiful building with a landmarked lobby, gorgeous lobby. The space itself is somewhat bigger than actually what we have now. So what makes me happy about that is that I think we'll eventually, when we get there, we will have a space that can hold, a sizable committee room, so that's something that I've always wanted us to have. So we never, have to constantly keep on looking. And so that's good. So again, there's a lot of hoops to jump through and a lot of, little things to figure out. And but right now that's what we're looking at. Then the only other thing I wanted to, sorry. One other thing that just came in through off the presses right now, which is sort of very specific, but I thought it'd be very helpful. A good sign is about the Aladdin Hotel. Joe and JD, I heard from DHS today all about the contract. We've been dealing with the Aladdin Hotel for so long, and then we found out they were extending this emergency contract for stabilization beds there for 5 years with a 4-year renewal. I've heard today that they've confirmed with one of the providers there that they've, per our request, to limit the contract down to 1.5 years, which is an actual real, I think I said to DHS, was a good sign to show that they've listened to us. And now I want to put that in context. Why we're doing that is to put pressure on the building owners to actually create an affordable housing project there. Because what has happened is that these owners have
permanent housing,
right, a permanent affordable housing there. What these owners have done, it was allowed to a really subpar building and housing be rented out by DHS to providers and have folks to living there in shelter in these units in these buildings that is just unsafe and really poor quality. And so what we think will happen here is that the pressure to get a deal done with the city to turn this into permanent affordable housing will be a great success. So I just wanted to say I thought that was a good sign of everybody pushing on that and that happening. That's it.
Thank you, Jesse. Paul?
Just really quickly, Jesse, on the agenda for the full board meeting, I'm sure it's a typo, but you're calling for board elections. I hope I'm not having to run another one of those.
That's Paul. I think he's really trying to get rid of me. I think.
I'm sorry, Jeffrey. My bad. This is the second month that's been left on there. My apologies. My apologies. I am not trying to start a coup.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jesse. Any other questions for Jesse? Okay, moving into new business. Another illegal demo. Joe, I'm going to pass it over to you at 452 West 36th Street, please.
Yes, about 2 weeks ago at 3 to 4 in the morning, we didn't know what was happening. The 452 West 36th Street owner began to rip out the windows and to put a plywood seal on the windows and put a cement block on the ground floor. We have found out since this was not the owner. In fact, this was a combination of DOB and HPD and the NYPD, because there were squatters in the building actually using drugs and prostitution in the building. The building was occupied a little over a year ago, fully occupied. This has been emptied by the current owner, and we're very concerned this could quickly turn into an illegal demolition issue. So we want an administrative letter to have a meeting with our various agencies, and we'll pick it up, probably refer to land use for the March meeting also.
Any questions on that? Okay, so that'll go out as an admin letter. Thanks, Joe. Last month, one of our, back in January, an e-bike rider was riding on 11th Avenue. He was hit, he was doored by somebody getting out of a taxi, and he died last week. He lived on 56th Street in Hell's Kitchen. And so I'd like to have a letter tonight to DOT and our electeds asking for the long sought after safety improvements to be installed on 11th Avenue. You'll recall when another neighbor of ours was hit leaving the Time Warner Center, the garage to Related. We similarly followed this path of quickly passing a letter out of exec so we could get this out. It's very straightforward. It was shared with you this morning. It calls for a hardened edge on the bike lane that's over there, as well as the light timings and extending that protection extending the bike lane all the way down to 22nd Street. Christine, did I miss anything?
No, that's it.
I would entertain a motion to adopt this letter.
So moved.
Is there a second? Great.
Second.
Any objections? Present, not eligible, or abstention? Okay, the letter passes. Thank you, everybody. I'm gonna take these. I'm gonna give an update about the state development sites, Jesse.
I'm sorry, I apologize. The letter that we just voted on, that's just going, but that's still going to full board, or do we want this going out?
But for, yeah, you wanted to have it gone, right, Jeffrey?
I would like that full board should ratify this because it's something we've asked.
Okay, thank you.
It's no new asks. It's just a ratification. So full board can do a ratification.
No, there is a new ask. I mean, we're asking for the extension of the 11th Avenue bike lane.
The bike lane.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's okay if it's a new ask. I just wanted to confirm
Right,
the executive is voting on it to be sent out immediately.
Yes.
It's in the packet. People should have, seen it a little bit, and then we'll ratify it at full board. Got it.
So on the agenda, the next discussion topic was state FAR residential development cap, but I want to give what I think is a shorter update first. I had a conversation, have had a couple of conversations with folks in the governor's office as well as ESD regarding a number of state development sites in our district. We're familiar, obviously, with the Penn Station GPP plan, with the Highline East extension. There's also a Highline West plan in a play. There is Site K, and there's the Bayview Prison. All of those are state-owned sites that offer a lot of potential for engagement with us, with the state, and opportunity across the board. The Site K RFP was pulled from the market about a month ago now. And the comments from the governor's office was that she wanted to have more community engagement around it. My conversations had to do with the fact that ESD is onboarding a new president. Hope Knight is her name. And they want to have a conversation with Community Board 4 about what we would like to see at these sites so then they can incorporate it into the RFP. So kind of reverse planning of what we've been dealing with for the past decade with the state, in that this is how we would like to engage in RFP planning. So the community affairs director, Marion, is leaving ESD after 20 plus years. Holly Light is also going to be leaving ESD. So there's a lot of changes taking place. We're going to be doing our best to figure out how best to sort of plan and attack this, but know that there may be some direction coming for committees to take up these sites accordingly, and for us to figure out how we can best have conversations to prepare for when the state brings them to us for consideration. Christine and then Joe.
Yeah, I didn't hear clearly whether, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't hear whether you said the Hunter College site is included or not.
So I see Joe nodding, and that's a good thing. But the last I heard, the city wasn't sure if it was the cities and the state wasn't sure if it was the states. So I think that is still the determination, is it's TBD. But
it's actually it's owned by the state.
Okay, so
De Blasio wanted it. That's where the dispute came from.
Okay, got it. Thank you for that. So Christine, that will also be in the mix. Thank you. Joe, was that a part of your point?
Yeah. I just wanted. There's been a lot of discussion about the need in the city for more psychiatric beds. We've had this both in housing committee. But I wanted to ask if we could set up a meeting between CLU and housing to discuss this, because it occurs to me maybe the Bayview site as part of that location would be a very good thing for that, because that's one of these things that we just don't have in Manhattan. Yes. And the idea that we could think about how do we get this rounded group of needs settled, and Bayview being the state and what it was as a prison, it's got small rooms, things like that. So like supportive housing, but again, a psychiatric component there. That's a desperate need.
That'd be awesome.
So, Joe, are you saying that the committee should, you're suggesting a joint meeting, or you want a small meeting?
No, I just want a small discussion
leadership?
between the committee chairs talking about the possibility of this.
Got it. Jesse, that sound good to you? Okay, so stay tuned, because there's a lot of, like I said, opportunity, but also potential for our engagement to really plan in a big way what we want on these locations. And now, final bit of new business that I have, as a part of the state budget put forth by Governor Hochul, she has put out legislation that would lift the cap across the state of New York on residential FAR. Right now, there is a cap of 12 FAR on residential development across the state of New York. Her legislation, in effect, is a home rule action, and it would give the municipality the ability to determine FAR lower than 12 and higher than 12 for residential developments. This action would not override or supersede any local zoning. It would not affect any zoning that is already on the books, or frankly is in the pipeline at the moment, because if something is certified, it will not be affected by the state budget that's adopted at the end of March. So something I was hoping we could do this evening is do a general letter of support to our electeds and the governor for this lift in residential FAR across the state. I am hoping we can do this because, as we all know, we have a tremendous housing crisis, and there's particular spots in our neighborhood where we could get a whole lot of new affordable housing out of this, because in 2017, when the city of New York adopted the mandatory inclusionary housing law, any new development that goes, any new zoning that happens in the city has a 30% affordable housing requirement. And so let's just say, to use this small neighborhood of Hudson Yards as an example, there is a building that is currently zoned commercial through the Hudson Yards zoning structure. If they went before city planning to have that use go from commercial to residential in an area that we've already agreed, height, bulk, density, the whole nine, there would be a tremendous amount of new affordable housing that could be built by that use change if this cap were to be lifted. So I know I see hands up already. There's other folks who can speak to this as well, but I think it's extremely important. It's timely because the New York State budget gets adopted at the end of March. And it would be useful if we do come around to supporting this to let our electeds know that this is the case. And so I'm going to go to Paul and then Alan.
Jeffrey, thank you. I'd like you just to address the Penn Station concept too. Will you integrate that into your?
So for about a year, we've actually been talking about this already, because we wanted to take this concept and apply it to the GPP area around Penn Station, which would have required an act of the legislature to increase that FAR cap strictly in the GPP zone, if you will. The state agencies cannot override state law, but the state can override itself. And so we were hoping that would happen on the Penn Station site. We didn't get any traction there. And so this is a new opportunity to affect that, to hopefully get more housing accordingly. So that is something that can run on parallel, but it's also very separate to this ask tonight. Alan? Thanks.
Would the cap be a case-by-case basis, or it would be across the board?
It would be case-by-case basis based on the City Planning Commission taking up a rezoning, a developer or a community putting forth a development plan that would change a use or look to change the zoning in a neighborhood. So again, it would not allow a 100-story building to be built in the historic district of West Chelsea, because it doesn't just go and it doesn't automatically change the zoning just because it would be allowed. Katie?
Two things. So I understand it wouldn't change it just because it would be allowed. It would be on a case-by-case basis. But I guess, so my first question is, so could a 50-story building be approved in a residential area if it was voted in? I'm just wondering, like, so people who have whatever windows looking a certain way could all of a sudden, and there's no, the building next to them doesn't have FAR going that high. Could it be the case that all of a sudden a building could be built there if it was approved?
Jeffrey?
If the city takes up a rezoning of that to increase the already existing cap.
Okay, so there would be a risk, but depending on what was voted on. Okay, and then the second one was, I was a little unclear from what you were saying. If in this letter that you want to have us vote on tonight, would we be saying that we're supportive of it specifically because we want more affordable housing? Like, would we be talking about affordable housing?
Yes, because the reason to me that we are able to support it is because any change that comes with the cap being lifted still would have to go through ULURP. And so that means the MIH law would apply, which requires 30% affordable housing on new developments.
Okay, so we're saying just, we're not saying we would want more of any new thing to be affordable housing than 30%. We're just saying that we would want this because it would allow at least 30% of new housing to be affordable housing.
Yes, because we have a mechanism to require a minimum of 30%. Obviously, we always seek more.
Thank you.
Leslie and then Marty.
I don't feel comfortable with this, Jeffrey, though I do feel comfortable with the thought. I think it's a really slippery slope. Number one, because though we want it for more affordable housing, or we would think it's for, that's not only what that would be for when you expand this. And number two, I think it's a really in-depth conversation. This is a really detailed, nuanced, in-depth conversation. I think for me to understand it fully, I mean, you might, you or Joe or someone else might understand it much better. But to say yes, to just say, okay, let's say we approve, we're going to say we support this and write a letter and that's it. I think it requires a lot more research in depth. And like I said, I've looked at this a little bit a few weeks back. I think it's a very slippery slope, and I don't think it pertains when they're doing this just for affordable housing. And that makes me a little nervous. Though I do agree with the premise. Does that make sense? I agree with the premise of your letter. I don't know if I could agree with it right now.
Marty?
I agree with what I just heard Leslie say. Is the removal of the FAR cap, is it tied to affordable housing or is it wide open? If it's not tied to affordable housing, I'm not in favor.
It is tied to affordable housing because in effect, it's home rule. It gives control to the municipality who has a land use action. So if Buffalo is taking up a land use matter and that city has regulations that dictate how housing is built, then it's Buffalo's responsibility. In this case, in the city of New York, we are the home city in this case, and we have on the books laws that require affordable housing for new developments. So it's funny, we are often fighting for home rule because we don't want the state dictating what happens on our streets. So it is a return to the city in terms of how that happens. That's how I see it.
I just want to repeat it. If we are not saying in the letter that we approve the removal of the FAR cap contingent on it being for affordable housing, I'm not in favor of it.
Joe?
Yeah, in general, I also support this idea. However, for example, at Hudson Yards, which is a great example, it's in the board's affordable housing plan saying we want to have more residential use. That is not a rezoning. That would be a text change. And the text governs how you get what's housing versus commercial. So let's say there's a site on 11th Avenue and go to 20 FAR. Well, that's great. That means you hopefully get 20%, 30% of 20 FAR, a huge building. But there's more devil in the details here, Jeffrey. And I think if we want to make a general statement, that's the way to go. But I'm very concerned about, and we should tie it to affordable housing, because there is no guarantee that on a certain site, given the various circumstances that happen, the developer cannot say, it is not an MIH site, because it's merely a text change or something like that.
It was my understanding that a text change still requires ULURP, and so therefore, any new action would subject it to the MIH law.
No, it doesn't. Certain text changes are not subject to full ULURP. So that's the kind of nervous. I mean, by the way, I'm really with you on this in general, but I think there's a lot to be talked about among, I would say a general statement, but qualify it.
Again, I started by saying I'd love us to generally support the terms of this, and then we're in discussion point right now. So
right.
It
and
sounds
then
like
refer it back to all the committees to have a huge, robust discussion over the next 2 months, because it's the implementation that always gets me nervous, because our ideas versus what happens are two different worlds.
Yep. So again, was hoping we're, timeline crunch here is part of the issue. And so that's why I wanted to bring it up tonight for discussion. Bert and then Alan. Actually, Bert, I'm gonna go Bert and then Frank, because Alan, you had your hand up if that's okay already. So Bert.
Yeah, I also would support this generally. And I think there is a time constraint, because we want to get this to our electeds who are going to be voting on a budget. And this is part of the governor's budget proposal. So I think on a general basis, we want to initiate, yes, thank you, home rule. No more state imposition of the, what was it, the 75%? No, it wasn't 75%, whatever it was.
12
FAR.
FAR.
12 FAR. As soon as I said 75, I know that was ridiculous. So I'd be in favor of this, and yes, I'm not the details on this. I would respect everyone on the housing committee, everyone who knows much more than I do about the devil and where to find the devil in all of this. But I think it'd be important for us to get this general motion out now, and then over the next 2 months or so, go into the details. And one thing I do want to say is that it's not conflated. One, we're talking about a state imposition, eliminating a state imposition in FAR, which is what we're talking about here. And the affordable housing, the 30%, that's a city law which already exists. And again, it's site by site by site moving ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Bert. Frank?
I guess I agree with Leslie on this. I'm concerned that at least I don't feel I know enough about the issue as a whole, even to take a general position. And as I think we've learned of things like permanent open restaurants, where we took a affirmative open position, and then as we got into the details, I think people are even questioning whether we wanted to affirmatively support the whole thing. I similarly think, given the way the city has turned on us, most recently with the MTA site, that a sort of absolute state blockage could possibly come in handy at some point. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just saying I'm concerned about rushing ahead with a general positive statement without our really having our arms around the details, which might undercut that general positive statement.
Thank you, Frank. Alan and then Paul.
I'm just curious about something, because there's talk about the 421A program, how the real estate industry wants to bring something back, and that conspiracy-wise, I guess, I don't know. Is there a tie-in here? Is the governor tying in? Does anybody hear anything that one hand washes the other on this or something? Or
There are numerous parts of the budget that relate to development, and one of them is a new program for a tax subsidy to develop affordable housing. It's sort of I don't know what the number is, but it's like a 421A 2.0, basically.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying, is there a connection here with the push to give us the home rule and to continue on with this program that gives with the tax benefits to the real estate? That's I'm just, if there was any No, nothing, Joe. All right. Thank you.
Let's see, Paul and then Christine.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I think I fully support the concept here of increasing FAR for residential. And as you point out, here in New York, with MIH, we have, and the ULIP process, we'll be able to guarantee 30% affordable. I think what I'm hearing, though, is from other committee members is that we probably need to make a more affirmative statement about the guarantee of affordable units within the increased FAR. I have fear that, and Alan's point just now that 421A is, being phased out. What happens in 10 years if people figure out MIH doesn't work and then we phase it out, and then a developer comes along and gets a 20 FAR residential complex, and the laws have shifted such that it doesn't force affordable units. So perhaps one way to bring this to a general statement is to say, generally, we support an increase of residential FAR as long as there is a guaranteed affordable component to any increase. And that's our statement, and then we can dig deeper into the details as we move along.
Christine and then Lowell.
Yeah, I think I agree with Paul and other speakers here about spelling out the requirement for affordable housing for any portion which goes up. But I would also propose that even as a general level, we specify that this is within an existing FAR. It's not, it's allowed, the cap is removed when an FAR has already been established. So it goes for the large business office, construction and zoning, like Penn, like maybe Midtown zoning, like where you already have very high FARs, and that within those FARs, this is when you remove the cap. So that there is no creation of additional, new zoning just for the sake of it. And I think it should be discussed in detail in the committees, because it could be very complicated and very misleading.
Lowell?
First of all, the number you were looking for was 485W.
485W, thank you.
I love the concept of home rule, and that's the piece of this I like, but there are too many other uncertainties. So if you want to send a letter, I could support a letter saying we support the concept of home rule, but we have concerns about the affordable housing piece that Christine and Paul and everyone are mentioning, and keep it really general. Say this is what's okay with it, but this is where our major concerns are. And without even advocating a position, just saying, listing what the concerns are, that we want to make sure that this is used to create more affordable housing and not giveaways to developers.
Joe?
Yeah, I want to sort of change my position. The more we talked about it, we need to be community board 4. We need to do all this internal discussion, bat things around, and when we write a letter supporting this, give this whole host of considerations. For example, increased FAR means more children, means more schools, fire departments, all these things that we always ask for in rezonings. And I just think that the way these things get done, the fact that it started, Jeffrey, this year is good, but there is no real reason that it has to pass with this year's budget. If you just back this to our various land use committees and housing committee, and then this is something that gets taken up in the next 6 months or so, and is part of the 2024 budget, to me, 20, I think this is a big discussion, and I think it actually has a lot of merit to knock around. But there's more devil than there is here. I think it's a little premature to say for this budget for March, end of March, that we're going to say let's go with this idea without getting all these things fleshed out by our various committees. And I think you've convinced me, or in the last couple of days, that we should consider this for real. So, but not to jump to the rest of the judgment. That's how I feel on this one. The more I heard tonight.
Kit, and then Jessica.
Thanks, Jeffrey. I'm generally supportive, and I think Paul made the point that I wanted to make much better than I ever could, I think most folks know my background is in education. And so my schema is sort of comparing this to mayoral control. And so what I would say is I've been a big fan of mayoral control when I liked the mayor's policy on education. And so I think there's a real risk if we don't hash out what are the main concerns that we think need to be attended to in a world where this gets implemented in line with the comments that multiple folks have made. But I don't know that we can't initially indicate our approval of the general concept and signal our intention to get to a more detailed place about what we think the key topical considerations are, as well as underneath those, what we think the things are that are most important to the communities that we represent. And so I would be in favor of us saying we're generally in approval of this direction, and we'll come back with a much more substantive response to what we think this should sort of guarantee, and what we think the guardrails should be around that.
Thank you, Kit. Jessica, did your hand go down? It went down.
No, it's Betty.
Betty?
Yeah, I have concerns about bulk and not only the social, more children and more traffic and everything, but when you lift that cap, you're going to get higher buildings, and I think that somebody needs to have an analysis of the potential impacts of doing this. If you have this kind of proposal, usually you have some kind of analysis, environmental analysis of what this could result in. Do you want to have sky-high buildings, in your neighborhood? So that's in addition to all the other concerns. Thanks.
Sure, thank you. So the couple of key things here. I've made it very clear every meeting I'm an opportunist, and I do see an opportunity for us to really at least put a word in or two on the conversation. And if this does pass, the city's gonna have to come up with a whole bunch of things to take it on. Frankly, Joe, this is where I feel like your point about schools and seats and hospitals and libraries, that would be the city's job to determine.
And look how good they did in Hudson Yards.
But I mean, we can have a debate about how bad ULURP is generally, right? Like that's a separate topic. It's exactly why when I gave that presentation about ULURP process, we're not talking about what's wrong with ULURP, we're just talking about the process. So I'm gonna go to Christine because she has her hand up and I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, I think, when we did the legislation at the state level for the bus companies, right? Long intercity buses.
Yep.
So the legislation was reading like, okay, there was no legislation before. So it read like the city, we are delegating now to the city the power to regulate those buses, provided that blah, 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 right? And I'm just wondering whether we could settle there, saying, the only thing we want is the state delegating to the city and asking the city to develop guidelines and to develop rules to implement that. Because that's what, that's exactly what they did with the buses. Not that the result we had was great, but essentially they directed the city. They didn't say to the city, it's gone. They said, the city now has to study and implement something. And so that was like a next step in a sense.
Joe?
I just get very nervous of passing the law and doing the rules later, like we're doing with the whole outdoor dining thing. So I think a super general statement saying that this should be considered, but I don't think we should be using any of our force to help this get considered for the budget by the end of March. Things done in haste create all sorts of unintended consequences, and this is a case of that. So I think the idea that everyone's talking about it openly is great. That starts a conversation off. Because it may be, Jeffrey, a very light letter saying that as a generality to explore this and discuss it for future adoption. So it's just our voice is there, but there is no saying we endorse it. Because there's got to be a whole laundry list that we put together with this when we actually come to a position.
Bert?
Now, all the considerations and the details and the devils that we're discussing, all appropriate, I think, all legitimate, and have little to do with the state. It all has to do with the city and zoning and what goes on here. What's before us right now is only the lifting of the state limit. Anything after that takes place in the city with city institutions that we have to then contend with. But I don't think it has anything to do necessarily with what's before the legislature and the budget. I think what we can do now, and I hear from Lowell, I hear from Joe, I thought I had it, maybe heard it from Betty a little bit, I don't know. Kit, is we have a general resolution. We're in favor of lifting the state limits, putting it back into the city hands, sometimes called self-home rule, right? And then these are some of the considerations we will want to study when anything happens and comes before us. And we would like maybe the city to look at it as well.
Joe,
It's
you're
time
on.
to write that right now. Like, I think the issue is just putting something out there saying should be considered as an action in the future. I think the idea of pushing it for this budget puts us under a gun to then have to come up with a pile of things immediately as this thing gets implemented. Because let's say by some fluke it does, because I'm concerned about the real estate industry. They're the abusers here. We have to make sure our protections and our guardrails, as Kit used the word, are in place prior, that's all.
Leslie?
And I'm not going to the merits one way or the other of the letter, but I do want to say if we're the community board, I think we should first go to the community before we take a position on this. I think it should be I mean, we're the community board. We're not an executive committee that, kind of has our opinion and this is what we're doing. I think at the very least, it should go to committee just to talk about and let people, if people have an opinion or voice their opinion, they can do so. Because you know what, Jeffrey, maybe some people will be like, I don't believe in, higher, I believe in repurposing. I don't believe in taller buildings for, I don't know what we're going to get. But I just think as a community board, we should throw it back to the community first and then form our opinions and letters from that.
I hear you. I think there's a mixed, sort of school of thought on various things as it relates to leading and making hard decisions. And I think there's a lot of hard decisions that we make as a community board because a lot of us are very involved in our communities, more so than just our necessarily our lay neighbor. And so I do think it's worthwhile to bring the community along and lead, especially when we're confronted with the crises of housing like we are today. I heard the housing committee talk at length about market rate rents of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms in Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen. And yet here we are again, falling back on ourselves to say, no, let's wait 6 months. Let's wait till the next budget cycle. So I'm happy. We're happy to not take up a letter this evening. Also happy to take up a letter. But again, I started by saying I'm an opportunist and I'd like to take a bite at the apple of every opportunity we have to go on record saying there's a crisis. This is an idea that needs exploration. I would have loved to have called for full support of this, but I'd love for us to go somewhere with it tonight. Kit?
Yeah, thanks, Jeffrey. I have a question, and it really is a question. I'm going to play the new guy card, even though I've been invited to this meeting for, I think, over a year at this point, which is historically, how closely has this board worked with the governor's office? Because my impression is, at least since I've joined the board for the last several years, not super closely. And so my wondering there is if this is a priority of the governor, who seems to have a very different orientation to community engagement and working collaboratively with folks like us sitting on community boards, there's also potentially an opportunity here to build capital, strengthen a relationship, which, you know, hopefully we can build on in many different ways in the coming years if the governor gets herself reelected. And so I happen to be in favor of this, but I also am very curious, is this something that even came to us under the Cuomo administration?
Andrew Cuomo did not do government this way. I think it's a really astute point of view to call that out, Kit. And I hope that the Hochul administration wants to engage, as opposed to Cuomo, who just wants to do what he wanted to do. So actually, I do see this as an overture. This is definitely a priority. From what I understand coming out of the administration, I see it as an opportunity for engagement also. And again, it was a change of tone from ESD about the state sites in the district that we've been hearing about since she took office, or since the new year came along as well. That's my experience. Others
did the governor pull this from the budget right now?
No, no, the governor has kept the FAR cap, statewide cap. What she pulled was the ADU, the accessory dwelling legalization.
Oh, I understood. Okay, I understood that the cap was pulled also. Okay.
Nope, just the cap remains. Well, the proposal for the cap stays in play. The ADU provision was pulled. Katie.
So it sounds like there might be, I thought you were very persuasive, Jeffrey. It sounds like there is support for a letter that says, you know, given Community Board 4's lengthy and deep commitment to affordable housing, we are pleased with this suggestion that there might be more opportunity if the FAR is given to home rule. And we encourage our local politicians to look into this possibility, because anything that can be done to do more for affordable housing is really critical for our city, right? So something that's sort of like that. We're not saying we approve of all, you know, however it's rolled out. We're just saying we like the idea if it helps with affordable housing. And then obviously we are gonna have to get into the weeds at some point. Is a thought.
That is definitely a potential for a letter. JD?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to say I don't trust politicians from day one. So I don't know why we should trust what is coming out of the governor's office, as great as she may be in her statements. I think what we should concentrate on is what's good for this community, not what's good for the state at large. And before we decide what's good for the community, I really think we need more public participation through the committees. Because frankly, Jeffrey, I understand your point, and yes, home rule is great, but I really don't understand fully the potential negative consequences out of this. So I would not support, I would support a very general, vague letter, but very careful.
So if somebody wants to make the motion on this general vague letter that everybody keeps referring to, I'm happy to end the discussion on this topic. But I'm really still not clear on what that is, because everybody's giving me examples of what it could be. And so I don't know what folks are comfortable with. Lowell and then Joe.
Right. I've been thinking about this as I'm listening to everyone, and I was in favor of a very general letter saying yay home rule, but there are too many questions here. But I'm wondering what purpose that serves. If we're just going to be very general and not say anything and say, yeah, this sounds like a great idea, but we've got a ton to look into before we can support it. I mean, maybe that's all the letter can say, but I'm not even sure that that accomplishes anything. So I'm kind of wavering about sending anything now.
I see it as a conversation starter. Joe?
Yeah, so I would propose that we completely divorce this from this year's budget. It's way too soon, and say that we are apprised of this, apprised of the efforts to lift the cap, that in general, this is an idea that merits exploration, but there has to be an incredible amount of discussion, community debate. In other words, all the stuff to get more information, and that we would like to be part of that discussion, a very general kind of thing, that at least puts us aligned with it should be looked into, but it's really something to happen during this year as they go into the next budget cycle. I don't want to be, I really don't feel comfortable being tied to the opportunity of
Okay,
this budget
so based on what
I
Lowell
could-
just said,
I could support
that
what
still
you just.
sounds, but then to me, that just feels like a waste of an email. Because at the same, because we're just saying if
you build something over time, you don't get to have it happen so
I agree with you. So if we want to not have it be a part of the budget, then, and that's the majority's decision on this committee, then that's the recommendation we should make in the letter. If we just think it's worth continuing the conversation, then I think it's our job to have the conversation. It can be referred to committees, and we can take it up, in due course, like we do. I do see a value in trying to start a conversation on this topic, because to Kit's point, we're being engaged in ways we hadn't been previously, and I think wanting to make an effort in that regard is important.
But Jeffrey, I could support what Joe said, because I raised the question, what's the point of the letter? The point of Joe's letter is don't take this up in this year's budget. It's a great idea, but it requires a lot more. Do not take it up in this year's budget. And I think that's worth saying.
Christine?
I hear what Joe said, and I think he needs a lot more work, but I would like Jeffrey, I would be opportunistic and say, just do it, right? Remove the cap. And then, as Bert said, all the work has to be done by the city. So
we don't know that. We still don't know any of this. We are not educated enough to understand it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
We don't know that.
I mean, I don't think there's anything to be done by
because the state, right? the zoning is dictated by the city, and the only restriction is this cap on FAR of residential development.
But the state can also say, if you want to, if it's a lifted cap, here's how you must go about it. They could actually prescribe something in the legislation that you must have a plan, you must have this, in order to make municipalities not just jump ahead to benefit certain developers. I mean, that's always a fear in these kind of things.
Okay.
Bert, and then we have a member of the public. Actually, well, no, Mike, Mr. Noble, who's not quite a public, but public member. Bert?
Yeah, I'm just getting very sort of frustrated because we're going in circles, and each time you go in the circle again, it gets smaller and smaller, the circumference, and this is eliminated from the circle, then that's eliminated from the circle. We have a budget item. It will have consequences, but I don't know what you're talking about, Joe, in the sense that the state should say, we're talking about home rule. We don't want the state to say it. We want the city to figure it out. We want our community boards, our city planning commission, our city council to figure it out. We don't want the state to tell us, oh, you can only do it under this condition, that condition. Yes, there are lots of consequences, lots of details, and it's for us to work that out. We're all it is before us now is lifting the cap.
This is a huge impact for the real estate industry. And if you don't think the lobbyists will run out like crazy, we have to have our act together before we say, I got to tell you, it makes sense, but think for a moment that there's not an incredible army of people who will figure out how for this not to work as we're talking about it tonight. That's all, which means we should have all of our stuff out there in a public discussion and brought before we just pull a trigger on something. I've never, in a month, I mean, it's February 22nd, March 31st.
So Jeffrey, let me ask you a question. Why not have the committees this month discuss it and come up with a position which is acceptable, and we could send it out at the next exec, which is a little late, but it's still, before the last minute. So people get comfortable with what, and the community has the chance of speak up, so it follows the right protocol. I mean, it's not my preferred option. Personally, I would go ahead and take the risk, but It's
Yeah.
just a reflection of what we are hearing here, which is so many people are uncomfortable and they need to wrap their head around it and apply their knowledge, and prevent the real estate people to deviate the objective.
Yeah.
So I think all the objections are good. We're just in a bind because there is a timing here.
Yeah. Let me go to Mike because he had his hand up from the attendees. Mike, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I am full in agreement with everything that's been said by the last number of members, going all the way back to JD. And I agree with him. One cannot trust these people. What I'm curious to know is the source material, Jeffrey. We cannot take up consideration of all this without seeing exactly what's been proposed, because I follow this stuff and I haven't seen it anywhere.
That would be helpful to share it with everybody.
I mean, let's see, what's the statement of purpose of all this? What is the foundation for calling for this to happen? I mean, the way we frame our letter has to be addressed to their motivations, right?
Well, I can tell you, Michael, I can tell you that in the CACWAG, in the Penn Station advisory group, it was suggested as a solution to possibly some of the Penn issues, because the idea was, well, they want only to build offices because they cannot use their FAR to put affordable housing. So the logic then was, okay, if we want to help the system to use to do affordable housing in Penn, why don't we suggest that? So I believe that this is where the ID was created.
That was the genesis of it then, is what you're saying.
Exactly. So then ESD.
But that is a case by case consideration.
I don't think anybody is saying it shouldn't be case by case. This is exactly the question of how do you articulate the law to make sure that it is implemented properly. And I think we are all in agreement with that. This is just a matter of, figuring it out and taking the time to do it.
Right. It really does call for more consideration, a lot more. So that's my statement. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. So look, I haven't heard from everybody, but almost everybody. And from what I've heard from, it's actually pretty split because, I actually do count votes. So I'm not trying to force this forward by any means. I'm starting a conversation. I really would like to have something come up from our board on it, but I'd like something that has a little bit of weight too. I guess it goes to committees if they're willing to take it up this month, but that doesn't give us a discussion point in the budget, which is going to be negotiated this month. And again, my goal was to actually be able to have a discussion point on this topic on the budget. So if it gets struck, sorry, hi Maria.
Hi, I've been listening. When you say this month, you mean February?
No, I'm sorry, I mean March.
Oh, I think I feel like I'm hearing two things. What Christine just mentioned, and also, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like I'm hearing two things. What Christine just mentioned, where it goes to committee and everyone gets some input, and then a letter comes out at next exec meeting, or we write something now, general and vague. Am I hearing everything correctly?
I think you heard it correctly, but my recommendation would also, to the latter of what you said of the general vague, I would also hope that we can take this through committees in a more detailed way as well.
Yeah, Maria, the answer is both.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, both. Then I think that's good, because I was going to say I would like to be able to discuss this more at committee.
So I do hear appetite for a general, this is a good idea. We have a lot of concerns. And we are, because this was brought forth, we are taking this up seriously to plan for how this should be approached from our community. Does that sound like a summary? I'm seeing some nodding.
Yeah.
Alan
But
and
not
Paul,
settled,
and
but
then-
not settled by March 31st. I mean, that's the part that's just like, makes no sense. We're not
Alan and
opportunistic.
Paul.
So at committee with the public, we need to be ready to answer these questions to the public.
Right.
Which we have here, and we're having trouble answering it amongst ourselves. But I would agree with you, Jeffrey, and I would agree with Kid's appraisal of this. A letter that goes to the governor, reaching out, that agrees somewhat, a soft letter that agrees with the concept, and start the conversation going. I think that would be very important.
Yeah, I would also note that the governor, in her statement when she pulled the ADU legislation from the budget, she said, I am pulling this because in my experience as a local legislator, right, because she started as a town clerk in Hamburg outside of Buffalo. So like, again, overture is important. Paul?
Sorry. I'd like to make a motion that we send a letter immediately to the governor expressing support for a change to the density of residential FAR, given the board's long-term history of finding various solutions to our housing crisis, and given the long-term history of the community board's position on home rule.
And
From there,
affordable housing.
and
But then we need to say we are also concerned.
Hold
by
on,
the-
Christine, let him finish the motion, please, and then we'll add.
Right, so that's, yeah, so I thought I just said affordable housing, our history of finding alternative methods of creating affordable housing, and our long-term history of supporting home rule, that we are wanting to investigate this further. We will be going through our committee structure and coming up with a more determined statement later.
So we're writing a letter saying we're going to write a letter?
Yeah.
We do that quite regularly.
I know, but.
Well, I think so. I'd like to say that, like, to Jeffrey's point, the governor is taking some steps that we would generically think make sense. There is certainly legitimate concern amongst us all that the devil is in the details. I mean, I personally am concerned about the removal of MIH in the future and the ULIP process not working, blah, blah, blah. We have these concerns. But if there is an opportunity in this year for the residential FAR to be increased, given home rule authority over it, if that does come into shape, then what we do is work with, if that happens in March, which, Joe, I agree that that's very fast. But if we do have that happen in March, then our focus is on what does the city need to put into place to protect the city's interests and our community's interests on overly dense FAR for residential purposes. So I think that I want to take advantage of the opportunity to support the governor's movement, but I do want to make sure that we are intricately involved in this resolution of this.
And I would add that we have a very different city planning chair of the City Planning Commission now that we did under the Hudson Yards deal. Joe?
Yeah, I just want to say that the community's interest and the city's interest are not necessarily aligned in general. And again, I want to note that this is an important public issue that deserves full public comment. And I think I would like to get us away from, we are acting in order to support the governor for this juncture 6 weeks before a budget. It doesn't make sense. It should go to the public and have full discussion. And I think we're going to get to the place that Jeffrey, I believe, wants to be, with a lot of things put in it, as opposed to this action now. So I do not support, I would say extremely general, and note that not included in this year's
I
budget.
guess I took Paul's motion as general in that it said, this idea is worth entertaining. This community board has long advocated and supported for residential development and creative ways to develop significant amounts of affordable housing. And we believe that home rule is extremely important. We will be developing further recommendations for how this should be implemented were it to take effect.
And
If
the
it's so
implementation
support the
is for
governor
the
for this
city.
action, for this budget, we are acting in a political fashion as opposed to a thoughtful, reasoned fashion. I'm
All
sorry.
right, so,
I cannot
and so
support that.
all right, Joe, I'm not disagreeing with you per se, but what I'm saying, I made a motion. Let's take a second on it. Let's take a vote. Joe, you can disagree with the motion.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Bert.
I have an amendment.
Question on the motion, Christine, and then Jessica.
Yeah, I have an amendment. Well, I think what Lowell said, if we write such a letter, what Lowell said to say we are very concerned about, unintended consequences and have a list of things, and therefore we are going to study them. So immediately we put that on the front burner and not give the sense that we are giving a blank check. So I would add the concerns in the letter. Say, we like the concept, but devil is in the details, and here are the things we are contemplating right now. How it should be implemented is really critical.
Thank you. Jessica.
Yeah, I would actually add to the list of priorities that Paul mentioned from affordable housing on down. I would add that our priority is to hear from the community, and that is missing from this process. And so we are going to insert that into this to make sure that we get that feedback so that we can make sure that the recommendations are consistent with the priorities, listed above.
That's good.
Thank you. JD?
Yes, I support Jessica's amendment very strongly. I'm very concerned that this executive committee is drafting these letters without public participation. I frankly don't understand why we're doing that. And I think we need to be very careful about setting a precedent. So Jessica, right on.
Thank you, JD. Bert, and then Marty.
I would just add something in the letter that I've seconded, that what we want to study are the local consequences of lifting the FAR state ceiling. Because that's what we're talking about, the local consequences and how it affects the community and the city as a whole. And that's what we want to study, mentioning all the issues that we've decided on.
Marty?
I learned a lot from this discussion. I have had experience with committees writing letters, and they have had bad outcomes. I am uncomfortable voting for a letter that I haven't seen. If there's a process that we can develop that would get the letter written and approved prior to the time that, Jeffrey, you want it to be sent out, I'll go with that. But unless absent that, I'm not comfortable.
I mean, this was going to run its process of getting voted on it at full board, right? We have to do that. So
that's new business.
You'll see it.
So Jeffrey, to clarify, this letter will be drafted and then presented to full board for final full board approval.
Yes. Sorry, I should have led with that.
Right. This is a letter from executive to full board.
Right. This is a letter coming out of exec that full board is voting on. Lowell and then Leslie.
I'm okay with everything Jessica said, but I want to strike something that Paul said. Paul led off by saying we are in support of dropping the state's FAR requirement. And I think that goes further than anyone here has said we are willing to do. I think we just say we're in favor of home rule. And this is an interesting idea, but we want to explore X and Y and Z and everything everyone else has said.
That's good.
Leslie?
Thank you, Jeffrey. Just to give some context, I was looking this up. The president of REBNY had a statement on this, and it was in full throat support of this, which this is why I want to look more into it, because obviously, if the president of REBNY is saying, let's go, I want this 100%, we're fully on board. It just gives me pause, and that's all. That's
but Leslie, I would ask you to look a little bit further and look into whether or not Tenants PAC is supportive of this, and whether or not the statewide,
That's my
housing
point.
groups
I want to
are
look,
in favor of it as well, right? Like
exactly, I
if
want to look further
Rev-
into it.
my Revney is really easy to see where they stand on things. So I would ask a little bit, to dig a little bit deeper and see what the housing advocates have to say about it as well.
But that's my point. Exactly. We should be digging a little deeper and find all these.
And again, so I guess I should have stopped that because it was not on the motion. And we have a motion that's been seconded. I'm going to summarize.
Can I just Jeffrey, just to Lowell's point, that the letter is intentionally about the 12 FAR for resident. I mean, it's a very specific sort of thing. So we're taking a position in favor of the governor's movement to raise the FAR. Like
No, to give a home rule. No, to give home rule on
Well,
the
that's what I'm
FAR.
objecting to.
I almost think it's more useful to just speak in favor of home rule and then reference why it's important to us.
Okay, all right.
Are you comfortable with that?
Yes, I am.
Take a vote.
As the second person who seconded the original, I'm not that comfortable because we're just avoiding, to say we're in favor of home rule, and the proposal is to lift a state imposition, giving it, we're saying the same thing, we're using different words.
I think we can
Just,
take a vote.
and that just annoys me a little bit.
I'd like to call the question. And so I'm going to go in order this time because we're going to have to count the vote.
All right, hold on, Jeffrey.
sorry,
Can you summarize what the letter is? Is your interpretation what you're going to write? What is it?
Sure. So I feel like Christine after a transportation committee meeting where there's 65 points all over the place. In favor of home rule, longtime advocates of making sure that home rule is paramount, strong supporters of affordable housing. We have concerns about the consequences of what this cap would do locally. And we feel it is worthy of attention and further discussion.
The community
input.
Yeah, I was reading the sentence to make sure I didn't sound like it was notes. And that we believe it is important to hear from the local community on how this would affect, what the consequences on how this would affect our community would be. I will get better at summarizing these things.
That was great. Okay.
And I think that's a letter that the majority is going to support.
I think so. So all in favor, if we want to use the raise hand function, or do the ayes have it?
I think we're fine.
They do. Okay. Any opposed? JD, I'm not sure what
Jeffrey.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, can we see the letter, since we do have time before the full committee? Would it be possible to see the written letter?
Yes, I will do my best and you will see it before it gets circulated to the full board. And I'd like for Mr. Restuccia to hear that commitment for the record as well.
I'm pretty sure it's going to be shorter than 30 pages. Thank you very much.
It will be, Joe. It will be.
Can we go back?
8:59, had to say something.
Can we just finish off this vote, please?
There was no opposed, I believe.
Well, Frank had his hand up.
Frank and JD were opposed.
Well, I think JD just had a question, right?
And Alan is opposed?
Can everybody stop?
Hey, hold on. If everybody could please go on mute. And I'm going to ask for those opposed to this letter to please use the raised hand function.
I think Frank stepped away already, though.
Any abstentions? Present, not eligible.
Sorry, Jeffrey, I'm here and I'm opposed. Sorry, just having
Thank
Zoom
you, Frank.
problems.
It's okay. So one opposed. Okay.
Wait, stop. Just what, JD, are you opposed?
I am not opposed to sending the letter, but it will be voted on at the full board.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
So
Regular
I
process.
See the letter. I want to see the letter
Yes.
and have a chance to vote on it
This
at the full
vote gets
board.
it out of committee. This vote moves the
Right.
letter forward, and you have the right to vote against it at
Right.
full board.
Okay, so one opposition, the rest in favor.
Yes.
Okay.
Light, simple, uncomplicated things is our mission at Community Board 4. And so I thank you all for your time and discussion this evening, and would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Thanks for leaving.
So
that.
moved.
Adjourn. Second.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jeffrey.
Bye.